Interjections, episode 100. What a way to celebrate. You all know the deal by now. The worst loss in the history of Inter, the worst loss in the history of the Champions League. The cherry on top of the least satisfying season of Inter football I can remember. So to celebrate our 100th episode, we've got, for the first time ever, all five of us here. Jay, Mikko, Irfan, and Sterling, and myself, Andrew. Jay, just hello, I guess.
Good evening. I'd like to just commemorate the 100th ignominious episode of Interjections with the ignominious Champions League final, which was this morning. Commiserations to all Interisti. My genuine advice to everyone who's in pain at this moment is to consume as much social media as possible, read as much hateful and condescending, snarky, belittling takes as possible. Let it, breathe it in, let it seep into the pores of your lungs like harmful asbestos, and just chew that shit down and chin up, move forward, absorb it into your system. Again, let that calcify in your lungs and make you harder as a result, and we move.
Irfan, let's get you in here as the most level-headed member of this podcast. I would just like you to speak directly to the fans of both Inter and Interjections. What do you want to say right now?
Man, it was rough. It's still rough. Doesn't feel that great. I think what's most disappointing, I think, for especially us and our fans who watch Inter week in and week out, is that it was such an opportunity to really stamp ourselves onto the world stage. And the way we shrunk, the way the team played was essentially unrecognizable. So for all the Inter fans, for all of our listeners out there, I would advise against engaging in too much social media. But Jay does have a point that in order to really, really appreciate the highs, you have to kind of survive the lows. And so this is definitely one of the lowest kind of moments that we've had as Inter fans. So go ahead and embrace it. And let's hope that this offseason brings some interesting moves. And let's hope that the team comes back stronger, even though there isn't much to really draw from after this last match.
Mikko, are you still feeling calm?
Well, I kind of am now, but it's not easy, and I guess I'm still kind of digesting the whole debacle here. So yeah, let's go. Let's try to manage this.
And finally, Sterling, appreciate you joining our group therapy session today, our focus group to run through the emotions. Always great to have you back.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here, even under these terrible circumstances in this very dark hour. I told myself I was going to jump on here whether we won or lost to either participate in the group therapy session or to come and tout the winning flag. But either way, happy to be here with you guys and look forward to dissecting the worst ever Champions League performance of all time.
Yeah, put the winning flag back in your closet. You're not going to need it for a while. The result of losing 5-0 yesterday actually simplifies the conversation a lot. We don't have to do any tactical deep dives of what went wrong in this match. There's no one moment we need to agonize over, like Lukaku blocking a goal-bound header. We were just treated to 90 minutes of a murder that resulted in our own death. And that's really where I want to start when we start talking about this match today. It's by pronouncing this window, this era of Inter as dead, closed, gone. because I am firmly of the belief you cannot recover from performances like yesterday. This is just a point of no return. There's no path to continuing forward with Inzaghi and this core of players. This was a cold dose of reality that showed us how far this team is from being elite, because we didn't belong on the same field as PSG yesterday from basically the first minutes of the match. We weren't playing the same sport as them, and we don't have a choice now but to start over and try again, because nothing resembling our current approach will ever be enough to get us there. There's not enough talent in this squad. There's not enough managerial ingenuity. And most importantly, these players just aren't winners. They aren't champions. And while they've shown us glimpses that made us think they might be the ones to get over the hurdle, this season was the stark reality that these players truly aren't champions. This was the game we all dreaded 2 years ago when we played Guardiola and City. This is what we thought they would do to us when we had a very fortunate path to the final. But even that team had more dignity in it than this team, because this team has none. Because this team had expectations. This team beat Bayern. This team beat Barcelona. This final was supposed to be a toss-up of sorts. And instead, what we got from this team was 0 wins over Juve, Milan, or Napoli, a scudetto thrown away, 0 Tituli. And that's the legacy of this team and this collection of players now. No one is going to look back and fondly and be like, hey, remember when Fratesi scored the winner against Barcelona, that Taremi laid off, or a Cherby's last-second stoppage time goal? No, we are now the team that got jail-sexed in a Champions League final the way no team has ever done before. And let's be honest, it's going to be another 100 years before this happens in a Champions League final again. We were just made a fool yesterday, and PSG should have scored more than 5 goals. Like, that's the worst part of this. We did not create a single inspiring moment in the match. And all our complaints about the composition of the squad, the age, the lack of pace, like we can't mark quick players, they were all vindicated yesterday. And I get that that PSG spent $1 billion to put together this squad, but $1 billion is not the reason they wiped the floor with us yesterday. Like, this was a mental loss, and it's because this generation of Inter players are losers. They're losers of 3 European finals. They're bottlers of 2 Scudetti, and that will be their legacy. We were unprepared for this match from the first whistle. I do want to talk a little about Inzaghi right now. We can get into his future at the club and all that later, but let's talk about just his performance this week, because there are many great things about Inzaghi as a manager. Blah blah blah, makes the most of financial resources. You all know the drill, but he completely dropped the ball this season and this week. The most obvious mistake was choosing to fight on 3 fronts when we didn't have it in us, and playing key starters against Milan and then immediately going out and losing to Roma after the second leg of the Coppa Italia. And that's all on Inzaghi for not managing the situation better. But mostly I'm mad about Inzaghi for the lack of preparation this week, because this team was not ready to play. It was apparent we only had one strategy for the match, which was sending long balls forward. The long balls didn't work. PSG had read the scouting report. They knew this is how we gave Barcelona trouble. And we had no pivot. We had plan B. It was just, we immediately lost the game. And while the tactical decisions are upsetting and the lack of preparation from the team is upsetting, honestly, what I'll mostly never forgive Inzaghi for is the distraction and the spectacle he allowed himself to become this week. Because when you are the manager of one of the biggest European sides and the media is having a circle jerk about you leaving and all the reports about how you have this lucrative offer to leave, it is your job, it is your obligation to come out and insist you're staying. You put out the fire. But he didn't want to do that. He decided that he was going to publicly play the leverage game and try and put himself in a better position to negotiate. And look, man, I don't care if you're lying. I don't care if you change your mind later. It's your job to put out the fire. He chose not to. He chose to play games instead, and we got a completely unprepared Inter team as a result. So I'll wrap up by saying this needs to mark the beginning of the ends. Like, it's time for these guys to go. Cherby out, DeVry out, Mkhitaryan, Darmian, Summer. They all need to go. We need fresh legs. We need new ideas. We need players who aren't afraid of big moments as opposed to our current crop who just keep folding in them. And we need to bring in younger players who are going to force players like DeMarco and Barella to earn their places in this team, because we also need a manager who's going to have the balls to pull the plug when one of our stars is too scared of the moment, because that's what happened yesterday. You had players like DeMarco and Barella not come ready to play, and a manager who is simply too loyal to them. So, yep, easily worst performance of my lifetime as an Inter fan. Jay, go ahead.
Good takes. Good takes. I think I agree with everything you've said. I am most let down by this shitty reality where this fantasy we had of a band of brothers overcoming the odds and giving one last hurrah with a Champions League victory. That fantasy is obviously obliterated. You know, if you have on one end of the scale these young, athletically gifted, hyper talented speed demon kids like Due and Yamal, and then on the other end of the scale you have basically Damian, who has really the bare minimum amount of footballing talent to become a professional, yet through sheer grinta and through good tactical I don't want to disservice the guy. He's obviously intelligent tactically. That's why he was able to carve out a long career for himself. But through sheer effort, through a decent gas tank, like a Corolla, basically, and a good sense of tactical awareness, he was able to become a serious stalwart. That's Damian on the other end of the scale. And there was a romantic notion that a team sport, could take a collection of players like Damian, like a Cherby, some of these unfancied heroes, just these humble, everyday guys, and by assembling a system which was greater than the sum of its parts, overcome even your Avengers of football, basically, which PSG is. But sadly, it turned out not to be the case, and football is going the way where the individual brilliance of these guys is just always going to overcome any system, no matter how well the system works, because these guys are system breakers. These guys are game breakers. These guys are game changers. And no amount of experience, no amount of Seria, Coverciano trained tactical genius can stop a young 20-year-old kid just blitzing past you at 1,000,000 miles per hour, or just, you saw what Barcola did to Acerbi in the dying stages of the game, turned him inside out before somehow missing an open net, basically. And you see when the way these guys finish, for the most part, they all went near post. They all smashed it in within like a centimeter of the near post. There's that old saying, aim small, miss small, and it reminded me of these shitty YouTube and TikTok videos you see of these football content creators, top bins, techers, all this kind of trash, right? And some young kid will go for some knuckleball into the top right corner, or try to put in a curler off the far post, and when they go in, they all go, oh, they all lose their heads and run around like a bunch of fucking lunatics, and it's absolute cringe, brain rot content for sure. But this is the kind of footballers you're playing against, right? And they're technically good enough to pull that kind of shit. You've got guys like Due going for the trick shot in the Champions League final and having the fucking technical skill as well as the nerve to pull it off. And that's something that is just incredibly, incredibly impressive. And it's something you can't strategize against for. And when you've got players like Lautaro, whose idea of finishing is just get it into the big rectangle, you can't compete. And so it was a excuse me, it was a sad realization of the fact that your young talented freaks like your Miles and whatever are going to dominate the next decade. Yamal, Doué, etc. And we are merely serving as a platform to elevate these little fucking twerps. That stings, but what can you do? Like I said, take a big mouthful and fucking chew it down, because that's reality. And unfortunately, these humble heroes, Dad's Army, the Damians, the Mkhitaryan's, the Acherbis, the unfancied but hardworking everyman, will not get the fairy tale ending that they deserve, and would have been, in my opinion, obviously highly biased take, but it would have been good for football to see guys like Acherbi and Damian and Mkhitaryan Sommer. It would have been good for them to have won a Champions League. It would have been good for football for them to have overcome the odds. But like I said, reality hits hard, and I often use combat or fighting sports analogies, and I'm going to use another one here. It's a saying that's commonly used in boxing and mixed martial arts, but they say Father Time is undefeated. And it's often said when a young prospect just comes in and murders a reigning champion. Not that we were a defending champion in the Champions League, of course, but we kind of got to that title fight with PSG by using our experience to overcome other dangerous prospects like Bayern and Barcelona. But then when we got to the final, we were brutally knocked out by the strongest of the up-and-coming young prospects and outclassed in every way. And it just goes to show that experience itself is not enough. You need to have raw attributes like pace and power and technicality, things that cannot be trained. And you need to have the mentality, which for me is the most disappointing part. The fact that we were so mentally unprepared for this, the fact that we went in there and the guys were just shell-shocked. Like you saw DeMarco after everything that happened, he was just in disbelief. He was just in there, eyes open, like the 1,000-mile stare. Like I use the word shell-shock quite literally. The World War I veterans after the Battle of Verdun and trench warfare, with that dissociation from reality. That's the way some of these guys looked last night, and it was sad to see. I'll end my spiel by saying that I still think that realistically the core of this squad will continue, and that's not necessarily because I want it to, but because we know who we're owned and operated by, and the financial constraints of this team, even if we have made quite a bit of money from this Champions League campaign. But you know how this works. We don't have the money, the means, the time to go out and buy 7, 8, 9, 10 players and sell 7, 8, 9, 10 players. It's not going to happen. We have a couple of departures, obviously. We'll get into it a bit later, but once they go, I don't think there'll be too many to follow them realistically. So get used to it is what I'm saying. Find a way to get over it, because that's what it's going to take.
I'm not asking any questions today. I'm just telling people to talk. So, Irfan, you're up.
I mean, I think both of you expressed the right sentiment. I'm going to kind of pan out a little bit and then get specific. So I think again, most of us who've seen this team play week in and week out this season, we've seen, that there's certain infections in the team. There's been an infection here and there that we've been fighting the way this team plays. And then last night was, that multi-organ failure, essentially, where everything was just overrun and every weakness and every hole and every bad habit that this team had just all collapsed into basically like a time of death. That's really what it felt like. Because part of me when I was watching this match was absolutely shocked and disgusted with the way we were playing. But then whenever that was happening, I also hearkened back to like some of our worst results, some of the bad moments that we've had in this team. And I think deep down, all of us knew that this team was capable of a performance like this. And it's what we had most feared. But zooming in a little bit into the match yesterday, this was unbelievably shocking because of just how bad we were from the very beginning, from the first kick of the ball. The team just looked completely unprepared. I don't know if there was like some sort of sense of entitlement that we've made it to this, where these battle tested veteran players, we just overcame what many consider a historic Barcelona side. And here we are. Of course we're here and we belong here and we can do this. We'll just treat them the same way we treated Bayern or Barcelona. I don't know if there was some sort of, complacency there, some sort of entitlement. I don't know if, like you mentioned about Inzaghi leaving and all of the media stories and hype around that, if that kind of played a role. But what I saw on the pitch yesterday was just unbelievably poor. And it wasn't even that we lost. I think most of us going into this match in the last episode predicted that, Inter might lose in penalties or was probably going to lose a close match. And even, once we gave up that first goal, there was some concern about how the team would bounce back. But just overall, the performance was so flat. It was so uninspired. And when something like that happens, honestly, I look to some of the core and the veteran and the leadership of the players, and I saw next to none on the pitch yesterday, which was the most disappointing to me. I've heard from people in Italy and people who work at the stadium, like when I was there visiting, about how Inter's different because they have this Italian core, this Italian spine. And even in the locker room, it's Barella and Bastoni who sit sort of at the front of like the circle or like the middle of the circle in the bench. And yesterday, I saw almost no leadership from anybody. I saw no heart. I saw no drive. I saw no fire. It was really, really bizarre for a team in a Champions League final to come out and play this way. We've compared this result to 2 years ago when we played Manchester City. And it's an apt comparison because this team should have done even better than that team did. But this team had no pride. And again, even Inzaghi looked almost resigned from the very beginning. Before even PSG scored a goal, he looked resigned that this team had no chance or that it was going to be some kind of cakewalk. I can't make sense of it. And I think what's most frustrating to me, in addition to like the way the star players played, was how there was just no fight on the pitch. Bastoni was subdued. Barella was bad. Like he it was one of the worst performances of him that I've seen. Hakan was invisible. Mkhitaryan was invisible. DeMarco was terrible. Like giving up the chances that he did. He got cooked so many times. It was unbelievable. Thuram and Dumfries were the only players that I thought were actually putting some effort and heart out there. Lautaro was terrible, invisible. I have a lot to say about Lautaro. I'm sorry, but we've talked about this year in and year out. Another year where he disappeared for half the season. And then in the biggest moments, I know he scored in every knockout round, but in a game like yesterday, I was telling, I think the people on the pod, but others of my friends, that the only chance we really had against PSG was if Lautaro was put forth a performance the way Milito did against Bayern in the final when we won the treble, and Lautaro was nowhere to be found. And I'm just tired of making excuses for the guy. So it was just everything kind of came home to roost. It was terribly disappointing. It was horrible. Inzaghi, when I look at the substitutions he made, we've knocked on him a little bit for being sometimes too cautious, too rigid, and for just waving the white flag too soon at times. But yesterday was just at a whole nother level. You guys know I'm a bigger Asllani fan than probably his own mom, but to put Asllani into a match like that is just unbelievably irresponsible. And some of his other subs showed no like just grit and showed no ambition at all. And so something seemed wrong to me on the pitch. I'm not getting into conspiracy theory land. I know PSG played a great match and they deserve to win, and they're a promising young team, but we did not. We looked out of sorts throughout, and some of that credit sure goes to PSG, but a lot of it falls on us for just being unprepared and unmotivated. It was a very bizarre sort of performance, and it was quite sad and it was quite pathetic. And I honestly do feel like heads need to roll. Lautaro to me needs to go. He's not clutch in any sense of the imagination, and he's not somebody that I think we can rely on down the stretch. I also don't think he's a great captain. And then Barella and some of these other guys need to do some soul searching, because that was about as miserable of a performance and embarrassing as a performance as I've ever seen.
The only thing I'll say, Irfan, is that you talked about Inzaghi and like subbing on Aslani. In the era of 5 substitutions, it is unacceptable to wait until the 55th minute to make a sub in that game yesterday. He should have been pulling DeMarco off the pitch at like the 25-minute mark. You needed to show more urgency, to show some sort of desire to stem the tide, and there was none. Just the entire team was shell-shocked. Mikko, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of takes you guys had, disagreeing with some, but I wanna start by reading a few quotes from our players after the match. Cherby said, for example, that what happened? We were a bit tense. They were playing at double our pace from start to finish, and like how PSG was unplayable. We couldn't do anything to them, and Barella said, PSG had more energy than us. It's absolutely true. Tiredness cannot be an excuse in a final. The biggest disappointment is that they wanted this more. Today our heart was missing in the most important match. And then Lautaro said, among other things, we failed to implement anything that we had prepared. And to me, it is like Irfan there referred. This is like very odd, and like I can't understand how this is possible that these guys cannot have the spirit and attitude in a Champions League final when they kind of split blood and did everything they had to get there. Against Bayern, that they fought like hell. Against Barcelona, they fought like hell, and then in the final they completely fall flat, and that's something I cannot kind of explain. Jay mentioned this kind of how the football will be about the individuals and not the team, and I kind of agree, but I want to say that maybe there is this kind of this one match is not maybe the proof of that. Of course, that there was Yamal. He was playing great against us in the semi-final. This 5-0 doesn't maybe is not the real truth of the situation, but kind of we should have played a lot better. Like we are capable of playing a lot better than what we showed, and these kind of quotes or comments that players gave after the match kind of shows that there was something like terribly missing. And I'm a Inzaghi guy, and I'm still Inzaghi guy, but I think he failed a big time preparing this match, because the whole team looked completely like they were lacking everything. We had nothing to show for from minute one. Like you guys said, like it was from start to finish. It was like we had no business in this match, and I think that's you can't have that kind of match like in any level, but let alone in a Champions League final. It's I can't explain that, and there needs to be some kind of soul searching, like what happened, what went wrong, and like how is it possible that every player was so like below their normal level? And I'm saying that in a sense that we play usually, or why we are so good, why we play so good is because we play as a collective, and it needs, well, mostly it kind of needs all its parts to work properly. But now the case was that none of the parts worked properly, so it was completely impossible to almost like to any player impact. Even if one player tried to play well, it doesn't work like that in this team, because it kind of functions like truly as a team and not as individuals. Uh, so that was really disappointing to see how unprepared we were. It felt like we were preparing to play against like Monza at San Siro or something. Like that we couldn't. There were no supportive actions by the players when we tried to build from the back. Sommer had to shoot those long balls, and there were never a proper kind of connection with the long ball. Thuram couldn't connect any of them to the teammates. He won maybe one challenge in the first half, for example, to kind of continue or kind of keep our possession. And I'm kind of lost of words, like how this is possible. I'm not going that far as saying what Andrew said, that we are like this team is like a full of losers, and we can't do anything. We need to like blow up this whole thing. I'm not going that far, but there really needs to be kind of a group therapy session of their own. Like, what the hell happened during this week? I don't know if those rumors about the Saudi Arabia connection regarding Inzaghi's future, if they affected if they affected the team as well. Somehow I find it hard to believe, like, why they would be so interested in that kind of thing, but I don't know. Maybe it played some part, and Inzaghi indeed didn't play that well the media game before the match, because I think he had chances to kind of shut the whole conversation. I kind of see the point of not wanting to lie or anything, but still he should have just like put it aside, and not kind of keep answering those questions constantly. Of course, media kind of how do you say, they make a big case even from a single answer, but still he should have played that better. But I'm still like completely surprised by this lack of everything right from the start. It affected the kind of the score, of course. They indeed, PSG could have won this game like 10-0 as well as 5-0. And how do you say it? It was a performance which was not a performance at all. We were almost like a bystanders there. And yeah, Sterling, you can continue. I'm so frustrated of the match just to think about it.
Sure. Well, what I have to say, I mean, obviously you guys have done a fantastic job kind of summarizing all of this. So I'll try not to just say the exact same things that you guys have been saying the whole time, because I do agree with it. But what I'll say is that something's obviously broken within the team, and mentally, physically, we just haven't looked ourselves for large portions of this season. I think it's easy to look at the Champions League final result and say, okay, we got smacked 5-0. And, for the neutrals, they'll probably look and say, okay, well, that's just because, Inter's not good enough. This was just a step too far for them, this Champions League level when you're running against guys like PSG, who, let's be honest, even on paper, from a pure tactical and matchup perspective, PSG is probably the worst team on paper that Inter could possibly play. If you were going to design a team that would be our kryptonite and that would expose our flaws and weaknesses, it probably would be a team resembling PSG, because they just have pace in every single facet of their game. We can't get in behind them because we're not fast enough. They don't have to respect the fact that we can stretch the field, because even Thuram, who's our fastest player, or Dumfries, who's probably our second fastest player, is not faster than anybody in their back line, not even Marquinhos. So there's no threat there. And we're a team that struggles to deal with pacey wingers. We have a very slow aging team. And the players throughout the entire Champions League that gave us the most issues were always pacey wingers. Go back to Bayern, Elise, absolutely killing us. Then we go to Barcelona, Yamal. I mean, I think we may have handed that kid a Ballon d'Or by what he was able to do to us over 2 legs. And then obviously yesterday we came up against a team where everybody could dribble. It was, even guys in the midfield are better dribblers than the forwards that we have, right? I mean, we have guys like Kvaratskhelia, obviously Dembele, and then Doué, who absolutely shredded us. So from a pure tactical perspective, I think that it was always going to be extremely difficult for us yesterday. There's no doubt about that. But to take it back to what you guys were talking about, mentally, this team has not been here for a while, and it's not just that we weren't good enough in the Champions League. We weren't good enough in any competition. We got 0 trophies. This didn't work in Serie A, and it didn't work in the Coppa Italia either. And the truth is if you start to really dissect some of the results that we've had this season, you'll start to see that we've had these blackouts before. We lost 3-0 to Fiorentina in what would have been considered to be a crucial time of the season. We lost 3-0 against Milan in Coppa Italia semifinal. So it's not like we haven't had some of these blackouts during the season already, where the team just flat out didn't show up for a match. And it's hard to explain why that would happen in a Champions League final, but it did. And you have to look at the coach ultimately. The coach and the players to a certain extent, but certainly the coach, because, you know, in my mind, Inzaghi is fantastic at certain things. I think that he has done more with less than I think any coach would probably have been able to do. I truly don't know that there's another coach out there that could get this particular group of players and get them to two Champions League finals within 3 years. But at the same time, there's a reason why we have struggled to finish out Serie A campaigns. There's a reason why we haven't won either of the Champions League finals that we've been in. And ultimately, those are two sides of the same coin. This is the same person who is responsible for both of these things, both being able to get there, but then also not being able to see it off and finish it off. And ultimately, I truly believe that your team ultimately takes on the character of your manager. And Inzaghi is a little bit soft. He's a little bit weak in the way that he manages the team, and you see it with his player selection. I mean, this guy is more loyal to some individual players than he is the overall team. Guys like DeMarco hasn't had a good game in probably 6 months. There's no reason why he shouldn't be fighting for his life to be in the starting lineup. When you have Carlos Augusto, who has played very well over the last 3, 4, 5 months. If you're somebody who's really running your team based on merit and based on earning it and ruthlessness that is required at the top level of the sport, then Augusto should be in your lineup. Augusto should have been starting against Barcelona in both legs. I mean, the loyalty to guys like DeMarco who look absolutely shattered. I mean, that guy yesterday had a generational stinker of a match. But you can't act like you're surprised, and you can't act like it wasn't a chance of something like that happening because he's been poor for months, and yet you continue to select him. Same with Mkhitaryan. Mkhitaryan, listen, I don't hate Mkhitaryan. I know a lot of Inter fans are tired of him, and I'm certainly there with you as well. But I do think that he's had a very overwhelmingly positive Inter career, but the guy doesn't have the legs for these top level matches anymore. And really, it's been going on about a year where whenever the pressure gets ramped up, and whenever we're in these matches where there's a lot of quick movement in the midfield and midfielders that are able to cover ground very quickly and sweep up 50-50 balls, he hasn't been able to complete even simple passes in those matches for about a year now, and Inzaghi just looks the other way because that's his guy, and he refuses to give somebody else another chance. So I think that you have to look at Inzaghi and his loyalty to some of these guys, and we've seen this with Italian coaches before. Lippi was famous for this when he had his guys, and he just played them for too long, and eventually the as was mentioned before, Father Time is undefeated. We do have some older players in this group here, and I think that we probably just took it a little bit too far. Um, and I think that eventually the bottom kind of fell out this season, and unfortunately, part of that's on Inzaghi obviously for not wanting to change and swap some guys, but also part of it's on the management as well for not really providing a real legitimate starting piece here or there that could actually improve the team. But we essentially played the same starting 11 for 3 consecutive years now, and that's just not going to get it done. Um, and then yeah, mentally something is just off with the team. It's hard not to call these guys losers because they've lost a lot. it's uh it's true that really since going all the way back to the Conti era where obviously we lost the final against Sevilla in the Europa League. We've lost 3 European finals in a row now with some of these guys who we consider to be our core, your Barellas, your Bastonis, your Lautaros. These guys have continuously gotten to the dance and then not showed up when it mattered most. So you do have to question some of the mentality now that's in the team and ultimately in your core. Now, with that being said, you can't move everybody. I don't think that we should be selling Lautaro. I don't think it's the right time. I definitely don't think we should be selling Barella. Certainly not Bastoni. He'd be probably the last to go. I think you do have to keep hold of that core for the time being because you just have so much to do. We've put ourselves in such a position now with the ownership has put us in a position, I should say, where we now have to probably move like 5 or 6 players this summer and get 5 or 6 players in. And that's extremely difficult to do. And we might also be doing it with a new manager at the same time. So, we got to hold on to what we know at least works at a high level and, try and build around that and hopefully go a little bit younger because as we've seen throughout the Champions League, that's where the game is going. The two teams that I think were the best in the Champions League ultimately were Barcelona and Paris Saint-Germain, and both of them have extremely young average ages, extremely young core of quick and technical players. And in a day and age where the fixture congestion is as difficult as it's ever been, and it seems like we're playing 70 matches a year, youth wins. The ability to bounce back and play 3 matches in a week absolutely wins. So, it's going to be interesting to see where this team goes in terms of the construction of it. I'm just glad that Morata is around because I know that at least brings stability to the project. But just mentally and physically outclassed yesterday, and ultimately it does fall on the manager. And so I do see I think it's very hard to see how the team moves forward at this point with Inzaghi as the coach.
I just want to piggyback off of one thing Sterling said. I agree that the fish rots at the head. So the criticism of Inzaghi, I think, are all well founded, and I think we have enough of a sample size of him now to realize that in some of the biggest moments against the best competition, he falls short. Like I think the team, in terms of like motivating the team, selecting the team, managing the substitutions of the team, and putting forth a game plan that will actually work against the opposition, he's proven to be fairly pedestrian in a lot of ways. But I can't help but think there was something even more different about yesterday. Like again, I'm not taking anything away from PSG. They deserved it. I was actually really impressed by how unselfish they all play. That was the difference really between them and Barcelona. Barcelona had all these players with insane talent, but they were happy to basically end up being, isolated one-on-one and giving Inter time to like basically make it two-on-one. But the way PSG was moving the ball so unselfishly, including Dembele, who historically has always been kind of an enigma, was something that I think Enrique deserves a lot of credit for, and then also the team that they put together deserves credit for. But the way Inter played yesterday was they couldn't have beaten a Serie B team the way they were playing, and PSG, as good as they are, they wouldn't have put five past some lower division French team yesterday. Yesterday was a performance that I think reeked of just so many things, and Inzaghi is part of it. But I'm sorry, guys, I can't help but also hold the core and the senior players on the team responsible. I mean, if your manager can't get you motivated, that's fine. But you're talking about a World Cup winning captain, Lautaro, who's been with this team forever, and he can't get the team motivated. I mean, what is he doing out there? I I can't. To me, the entire Lautaro thing has exploded in my mind because he was nowhere to be found. In the midfield, they were making like they couldn't put together passes even before they were under pressure by PSG. Dumfries and DeMarco were subdued. They weren't involved in much of the attack either. The back line was making all sorts of stupid mistakes. Thuram was trying, but he was getting outmuscled by people that he's stronger than. And Lautaro was nowhere to be found. And this was all before PSG did anything. We were like fighting ghosts out there, our own ghosts. It was really bizarre. So some of this has to fall on the players too. And you're talking about Inzaghi favoring certain players than others. Like the ownership and the management also need to figure out that if some intensity and leadership is lacking, you have to either bring that in or you have to move players who are not doing the part.
Yeah, I agree that we can't put it all to Inzaghi because, like you said,
it was the curver. It was the lack of choreo. There was some bullshit
well,
going on about. I think there's some bullshit going on for a while between like the curva and the club, and I think Inzaghi and Calhanoglu were both fined and suspended a game, weren't they, for speaking to members of the curva?
Yep.
And then I don't know what it was. Like they prioritized giving tickets to season ticket holders, which is in some way fair enough, but at the cost of the Curva Nord. And no matter what you think about the whole ultra culture and the high crime rate that tends to come with it, the reality is that's also part of football. And PSG humiliated us on that front, like absolutely humiliated us on that front as well. Their fans were louder than ours the entire fucking game. Their fans were all together. Their fans were the hardcore fans, lighting flares, choreographed banners, and and signage and the choreo. Ours was just like a collection of casual, friendly Inter fans. There was very little ultra presence, and we didn't even have choreo. We're a club known for having many, many famous choreos. The Madonnina, the Tite Dominet Milan, the Eccoci qua noi della Nord, all this stuff. The the one we had for the Champions League final last time, or even these like famous choreos we've had in Milan and Juve derbies, and we didn't have a choreo for the fucking Champions League final. Like, are you kidding me? Like the decision which resulted in us not having a choreo is an atrocity that needs to be studied, because, like I said, the atmosphere was entirely surrendered, and PSG were louder from start to finish. Obviously, they were singing because they were ahead, but even still, their fans were right from the get go. All the attention was on their fans. They were dressed in unison, chanting and jumping in unison, and doing all these, the typical fan things. And our fans were not, because these were not our regular hardcore contingent of fans. And like I said, everything about this just felt fucking cursed right from the get go. And the moment I heard the whole fan thing that happened and there would be no choreo, honestly, my heart sank. I took it as a really bad sign. Not that I'm a particularly superstitious type, but I was like, this is really bad. And I think it's a tangibly impactful thing as well.
Yeah, I remember in Istanbul, I remember how loud the Inter fans were there, and they were proper Kurva Nord presence there, and I remember hearing them singing and kind of chanting Inter all game long, compared to any city Manchester City fans.
Yeah, exactly. Did anyone hear any Ama Soltante Te, last night? I didn't hear that song once, even before the game, even during like the pre-game warm-ups and stuff like that.
But I think let me rephrase. We don't know what's the reason behind this decision, but I have some kind of suggestions, and one of them is that we have these. We have had these issues with Korva whole season because of the investigations related to drug trafficking and the heads of the Kurva being arrested and so on. So my guess is that the club has wanted to kind of take a bit of distance to the Kurva thing, and result of that, there's been a lot of tension between the club and the Kurva whole season. As we've seen, there's been no choreos, and I think one explanation might be that it could come all the way from the top, like this decision now from Oak Tree. They are the American kind of corporate kind of faceless instance there, and I don't know that there might be some kind of an order that, okay, we don't touch this now, we don't touch this this criminal organization now, and they kind of consider the whole Kurva like that, which is obviously total false, because most of the Kurva are not criminals and they haven't done anything wrong. So like Kurva protested before the match, that it's super unfair to treat the whole Kurva, because the leaders of the Kurva were like connected to the drug trafficking. They were arrested and
Well,
put to prison,
I'm sure the
at
club
least
probably made the decision to
put to
distance
court.
themselves. And it's hard to distance yourself from the Curva and at the same time invite them to the Champions League final and give them a bunch of tickets. Because, I mean, that's essentially what you have to do with these guys, is that you give them an allotment of tickets, and then you get to have the Curva there, and then you obviously do the Tifo. But I think that there was probably a decision from the club, and maybe that also came from Oak Tree, where if these guys are, part of essentially a criminal organization, and they've got people getting arrested for drug trafficking, and you've had Inzaghi and Çalhanoğlu both have to be fined and suspended for speaking to them, and then you turn around after that and say, "Oh, we're trying to give these guys, 1,000+ tickets to come to the game." It doesn't really sing from the same hymn sheet. It's kind of like you're talking out both sides of your mouth. So I'm sure, Oak Tree does not understand at all the ultra thing and why it's important for them to be at a match like yesterday. And they probably said, well, why the hell would we do that? Let's just bring the normal fans out. This is supposed to be a family friendly event. We don't need the drug traffickers here. So I'm sure that's probably how that conversation went. And I don't disagree, Jay. I mean, I think that it's nice to have tifo. I was surprised when I heard that they weren't going to have that at the match, because obviously, we've had it at the prior Champions League finals. I mean, the one that they had in 2010 was immaculate. It was a beautiful tifo. So it definitely would have added to the occasion and the atmosphere. But I mean, I don't care who was there yesterday singing. We were probably going to get smacked. To take it back to the actual match itself, and what one of the things I think happened yesterday as well was, throughout this whole Champions League campaign, we've only been behind for, I believe it was either 14 or 17 minutes, something along those lines. And
Let me reframe the conversation and just say, I'm curious, does anyone think Inzaghi's going to continue? Does anyone think he actually ends up sticking around, or do we all think he's going to take the Saudi offer?
I'm not like fully convinced he's going to leave, but maybe there is a lot of hope in that prediction, or like a, well, maybe it's more like a hope from me that he's going to stay, but I can't really tell. The rumors are so kind of conflicting, but at the same time, even DiMarcio is kind of saying that he is really thinking about the offer, which to me sounds, I don't know, it sounds incredible if like a 50-year-old coach, almost like, well, not at the top of the world, but he was just in the Champions League final, and he would go to Saudi Arabia to coach there. I just can't understand if Inzaghi makes that decision. Even if there's like a lot of money coming, like what he's gonna do with all that money? He's 50 years old, and he's made a lot of money already. He's going to get, I would say, enough money from Inter. Like, I just can't understand if he's going to leave us to go to Saudis.
I always assumed this was like a negotiating ploy where he can go to Oak Tree, can go to Morata and be like, I'm leaving if you don't give me X, kind of trying to be a minor Conte. Conte does this basically after every season. He goes to management and cries that if you don't sign Lukaku, if you don't sign Vidal, that he's going to leave, and usually he does. I always assumed this was going to be that, but it feels a lot more serious. It feels like he's actually considering exiting, and I have a feeling yesterday's loss might actually serve as a catalyst to expedite things.
Yeah, before last night, I thought pretty adamantly that all of this was total BS, that there was no chance Inzaghi was going to leave, and all these rumors were just BS designed to kind of, unsettle Inter. But I don't know, maybe as a way of coping with the performance yesterday, and given the fact that there is so much smoke around it, I'm starting to believe that maybe he is seriously considering leaving. And maybe it's not just a negotiating tactic, because I don't know how else to really explain it. And like you guys have already talked about, the way he handled the whole interest was, at the least very selfish, and at the most just one of the biggest self sabotages that has probably ever existed. So I don't know. Maybe he is leaving, and after a performance like this, I honestly, again, I'm sounding like a broken record, but like a performance like this demands certain, I think, pretty decisive action. And if Inzaghi is sticking around, I don't see how you can go into this season with the same core of players with nothing different, because you have to change things up. You have to bring in some fresh leadership somewhere. If you're not going to bring it on the manager, then you have to bring it on the pitch. And I don't know, something definitely needs to change, and people need to be held accountable for the way this team yesterday.
Yeah, and I don't want this to sound like we're overreacting to one match. Like, yes, yesterday was horrible, and it showed you how far this team is away from winning a European championship. But this was a loss of a season. This was, once again, losing every critical match in the league, or at least not winning every critical match in the league. This was just continually falling over hurdles along the way, and that's why it's time for change in this core. And Jay, I know you're skeptical that things are actually going to change, and you think you're going to continue with a lot of these players, but I think there's going to be a lot of forced attrition here, whether or not Inzaghi stays or goes. I mean, you look at the guys whose contracts are expiring, you look at the guys who are approaching 40 years old in age, like, there's going to be a natural runoff here, and like, we need to properly inject some life into this team, and we can't go out and the type of players PSG were rolling at us yesterday, these like pacey, tricky wingers, they're 50, 70 million euro players. Obviously, we're not going to do that. And one of the genius things about Inzaghi's system is that it can use players who are maybe less sought after than others, because when you look at players who are most expensive in the world, they're your fast, tricky players. And we've been using these, we don't dribble past players, we pass people open, and there's a budget consciousness of that makes it easier to sustain, and it's just not going to keep working. At some point, someone is going to need to spend money on young players with attributes we don't have on the squad. And if it doesn't happen, we're never going to win anything. It's that simple.
Yeah, I agree on that. And I think that, as you said, there will be changes in the squad because of the expiring contracts and like people getting old, which was pretty visible yesterday, among other things. I would hope that we keep Inzaghi so that he can use better players to kind of have a better players at his disposal and try to do his thing. Maybe also figure out some other thing. If the plan A isn't working, maybe try a plan B, and maybe with like a bit more younger profile players, that could be like more possible to achieve, have this proper plan B. And yeah, I just really don't want to see Inzaghi go at this point, because it's a, I feel it will be too many changes, since the squad will be already kind of changing. I feel it's going to change a lot in this summer.
He has
And
to stay. He has
if
to
we
stay.
also, yeah, if we also,
given the tumultuous,
if we
everything
also,
that's going on.
yeah, if we also change the coach, it's too much. It's not gonna
Especially
work.
when the names we're linked to are like Kivu.
Yeah, and Fabregas, like, what's Fabregas done? Like, he's got a Serie B side promoted, and played like non-offensively shit. Anytime any coach plays with a bottom 10 team in a way which is not like 1970s provincial football, 10 men behind the ball, one beanstalk like Pavoletti up front and long balls. Anytime a coach plays in a way which is not like that, they start saying, oh, he's fucking, brave and stuff. Like, it's just the way it goes in Italy, because Italy's so far behind. But as much as I agree with everything Andrew said about Inzaghi, I would still keep him. I will, at this stage, gaslight myself and everyone else by reminding you all that Klopp also lost 2 Champions Leagues, one with Dortmund, one with Liverpool, before finally winning it with Liverpool. Admittedly, he was not fucking molested 5-0 by a bunch of teenagers, but, other than that, he also failed to win and only won league title in his 7 years at the club. But the club is now much better for it, and for that consistent challenging, even if they came up short more often than they cross the line, the club is better off for it now. And yeah, as Andrew mentioned, who else are we going to bring in that we can realistically hand over the reins to, that's going to guarantee anything better than what Inzaghi is achieving? Like, can't remember who I was saying this to the other week, but I was saying all the banter towards Arsenal, look, it's fantastic. I too possess a deep irrational hatred of Arsenal. I think it stemmed from watching some AFTV back during COVID days, but that aside, people, the hatred of Arsenal and the criticism of Arsenal is so absurdly overblown, right? I mean, it's the kind of the start of the season things that people talk about. Hey, at the start of the season, would you sign off on a top 3 finish and semi-finals in the Champions League? Any fucking fan of any club in the world is saying yes to that. And Arsenal's done that, as have we, for that matter. Second in the league, semi-finals, Coppa Italia, finalist in the Champions League. Yes, obviously, like I said, we got absolutely fucking raped in the final. I cannot emphasize that enough, but still, that abhorrence aside, top 2 in the league, top 2 in Europe, it's not something that you can say no to. And while it's not like keeping Inzaghi guarantees that we're going to do that again, but hitting the reset button, I think, is not wise at this time, considering we don't even have the funds to really do like a really hard reset with, bring in some new coach who plays a completely different system, overhaul the squad, and buy, like, for example, 4 wingers or something to play in a 4-3-3 or something like that. It's not going to happen. Like, we don't have the money for that. So I still think we have to keep Inzaghi. As mentioned, realistically, I think we have to keep much of the same core, as disappointed as I am with some of them. And this is where I'll give my semi-controversial take, which I think gets proven right with every passing opportunity, that these guys like Barella and Dimarco are just, like I said, they're small-time Serie A players, basically. They're closer to Di Natale and fucking, Federico Balzaretti and Vincenzo Iaquinta and Fabrizio Miccoli. They're closer to this tier of Italians than they are to the Tottis and Maldinis and Pirlos. That's, in my opinion, the way it is with these guys. But that's a debate for another day. But we'll keep a lot of them, and I'd like to see us add some proper, some not half-assed solutions here. PSG started with Barcola on the bench, but Barcola starts from most sides, right? You've got that front line, that front 3 of Doué, Kvaratskhelia, and what's that other cunt's name? Dembele. And then you've got that prick on the bench, Barcola. That's 4 starting players for 3 positions. And then they've got other players who can fill in there, like Gonzalo Ramos. That makes it 5 starting players, essentially, for 6 positions, or for 3 positions, rather. We've got 2 starting positions up front, obviously, 2 forwards. We need minimum 3 starting players. If it's David, great. If it's someone else, even better. But you can't do this shit that we've gotten away with for so long, which is have basically 2 barely functional players for your 2 positions, and for the rest, you've got like just bodies, basically unregistered children, just, sex offenders off the streets, just random fuckheads, who can barely kick a ball. That's what Klaassen is. That's what fucking Arnautovic and Taremi are at this stage in their career. That's what Correa is, and you're not going to get by with that. So I think we have to keep Inzaghi. I think we have to reinforce and basically reconsolidate and go for the league, get the basics right, get that title back, and build upon that foundation. I'm gonna end my contribution here by saying a bit of a sour note, but the worst thing about that was it showed a whole new low that I didn't think in my wildest dreams that this club was possible of sinking to. I thought there was like a kind of minimum, there was like a foundation stone which would hold up the building, right, and prevent any ingress from dragging the floor down to what it ended up being. I mean, we've seen this club for many, many years. We've all been watching this club for the better part of 15, 20, 25, 30 years. And we've seen the highs, we've seen the lows, and between those highs and the lows, the craziness of Inter, right? But this just showed that there is like a new low that had not previously been accessed before. It's like the floor gave away, and then you just saw like 5, stories worth of just fucking nothingness before hitting a big fucking sewer of shit down the bottom. That's what this game was. So that was rather annoying, but what can you do? Like I said, take it all in, swallow it all, just fucking get over it, and we have to go again. It's not like we can. What are you going to do? Stop following the club? Disband the club?
Disband your Inter
Fear
podcast,
is
perhaps?
after 100 episodes and then stop. I think that the fear of
Wait,
keeping
there's another big podcast. There's another big podcast that's just debuted, I hear.
Great timing.
Except no imitations, guys. Stick with the OG.
So I think the fear of keeping Inzaghi in this situation is that what if the bottom really just falls out? We've like I said, we've started to see these results stack up now where when things go bad, they really go bad. And I knew once that first goal went in yesterday that we were really in trouble because we never really seem to be able to fight back when we concede first. And part of the whole part of what they were billing us as throughout this whole run up to the Champions League final was that Inter was never behind for more than I think 14 minutes during the entire Champions League campaign. And part of that was the reason why we were able to get as far as we had gotten because we never had to chase games. Once we were put in a position where we had to chase a game against a team that had more pace than us, it was always going to be extremely difficult for us. And it would have been difficult if we had to do it against Bayern, and it would have been difficult if we had to do it against Barcelona, but we never got into that position. And once we got into that position yesterday, we didn't know how to react. And to be honest, we really haven't known how to react to that in Serie A either. The only match I can think of in recent memory where we conceded first and came back to win was against Monza. Monza, the very worst team in the league by far, who still managed to go up on us 2-0 in March. And then we came back, obviously, and scored 3 to win that match, as we should. But that's the fear, I think, with keeping Inzaghi is, what if we hold on just a little bit too long and things really have gone stale and we end up having a season where these blackouts become more and more frequent as opposed to less frequent. I do think that the team itself has gone stale, and I think that that's part of the reason why we've seen some of this stuff happen. I would be interested in potentially seeing what Inzaghi could do with a management that's actually able to do a little bit of a net spend every year, because again, he's been put in a very tough situation. But the real question for whether or not Inzaghi is the guy to lead you forward is whether or not he's going to accept the youth movement, because we aren't going to be going out and signing experienced players anymore. We're not going to be signing players that are in their prime because they're expensive. And we're not going to be signing guys on freeze who are 30 years old because that's expensive. And it's just not the business model for Oak Tree moving forward. So what you're going to see is more signings like a Susic. I believe he's 21 years old. Luis Enrique, he's 23 years old. These are the types of players that we're going to be bringing in, players that are on that bubble and that cusp of potentially becoming really good players that have shown signs that there's something there if you can work with them and actually help mature them. But they're still going to be flawed players, because if you're 20 or 21 years old and you have no flaws, you go to PSG or you go to Man City or you go to one of these clubs that can afford to pay your price tag, because at that point it's probably north of 50 million euros, and we're just not going to be able to play in that park. So is Inzaghi going to be okay with taking on some of these younger guys, shaping them up, and building a team that he can move forward with. And only really Morata and Inzaghi know the answer to that question. Obviously they kept on saying they were going to talk after the Champions League final. I assume that that'll be part of the conversation. Is are you on board with this project and where we're going to go moving forward? I do agree with a couple things that were said. It's hard to see where you move forward after a 5-0 result like yesterday, but at the same time, it's hard to see where you move forward if you get rid of Inzaghi, because there's really no coach out there where you would immediately point to him and say, that's the guy. Fabregas may be the most exciting option in terms of, hey, he's just a guy who he's not the old Italian manager that we've always seemed to stick to under Murata. He does play a little bit more expansive football. You know that he'll actually play young players and not be, beholden to the the veteran status and the experience wins titles thing, and not just play guys just because they have seniority, which is certainly an exciting prospect, but none of these guys are overly sexy names. Fabregas could easily be the new Xabi Alonso, or he could be, I don't know, a Xavi who's gone after a year or so, and you just don't really know, And so with Inzaghi, you do know that there is a good coach in there, although obviously a flawed coach. There is a good coach there, and the other thing I agree with is that whoever we go for, if it's not Inzaghi anymore, they really need to play a three in the back formation, because that's what the squad is built for. And we just don't have enough money to do a full revamp this year when we already have so many pieces that we're going to most likely have to replace. And then also, wingers are expensive. If we want to compete for the type of players that Barcelona and PSG are going to be going after, and all the EPL teams. I mean, all the top teams in the world play wingers, and they probably play wingers for a reason, but that means that the winger market has a huge inflation on it, and you're probably going to be scraping the bottom of the barrel, or you're going to be hoping that you strike gold like Milan did with Leao. And that takes time, and you just don't know what you're going to get when you're scraping that bottom of the barrel. There's going to be a lot of risk there. We do have a core that's in place here. How good that core is, how good the mentality of that core is, there's obviously serious question marks around there, but there is a core there of players that are used to playing in a certain way in a certain system. So I think that ultimately the decision of the club will be to try and maintain Inzaghi. When you hear Morata in the media yesterday speaking about one bad match and we're not going to throw out the path, and the overall it's a positive season. When you hear those types of words, I think Morata's made his mind up that he wants to move forward with Inzaghi, and I don't think he's ever wavered from that. And so I think that that's ultimately what the club will do, and I'm sure we'll all get behind that. But it'll be a very interesting season to see, how aggressive we go with the youth and how willing Inzaghi actually is to play that youth, because I actually think he could do it. I think that his system is actually really well suited to some younger and more energetic players, and I think that he would be a great coach to develop younger talent. He's good at masking people's flaws and getting the absolute most out of players. I mean, the player that he's turned Dumfries into, I mean, who would have thought that he would be anywhere near the player that he is today, a couple of years ago? A lot of that's down to Inzaghi and his coaching method, and putting him in a position to succeed. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of what these next steps are. But I do feel like we probably are looking at another Inzaghi season if he's open to it, and if he wants to stay.
It just left a bad taste in my mouth yesterday when he's talking post game and he's like, "Yeah, I might not be managing this team in the Club World Cup." I think he's gone.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, maybe that was out of frustration because how total shit the match was, and how like he probably didn't want to be there at that moment, so he probably just talked like out of anything. anything he had in his mind. But yeah, those words are a bit kind of worrying, at least for me.
I'm willing to be wrong,
I
but I truly think he leaves. I think he wants to take the Saudi offer, and that if he wanted to shoot it down, he had ample opportunity to do so over the past week or so. All right. Well, we've been going for a long time now. We could probably wrap things up here, unless anyone has any final thoughts they'd like to air before we call it.
Looking forward to the Club World Cup, guys. See you in 2 weeks.
That's right. As much as we're sitting here belly aching, I'm sure we'll be right back here recording episode next week, breaking down whatever
there's
Mexican
actually,
club we're playing.
There's actually national team games also in between, so no holidays for
No
anyone.
holidays for the players. No holidays for your favorite amateur podcasters. Do we have a Jay's hot betting tip for the international break?
Bet against
What are the
Italy.
games you've got?
Italy's playing Norway.
Okay, in that case, Norway 5, Italy 0. Also, here's my fucking bet. Actually, it's my bet for the Super Cup, Tottenham versus Paris. Tottenham 3, Spurs Paris 1. It'll just be the absolute cherry upon the shit sundae for this spastic 17th place pack of retards from Tottenham to somehow beat PSG. But I can see it happening, so let's go with that.
It can also be PSG 10, Spurs 0.
No, I don't see it. I don't think. I think what we witnessed was a generational aura loss, the kind that categorically changes the way this club is viewed forevermore. I noticed early on in the Champions League that all these dipshit content creators, were like, "Look out for Inter, man! Don't sleep on Inter." I tell you, none of these fuckwits have ever watched a game of Inter in their lives, other than a couple of big Champions League games, and they just say that shit to try and look knowledgeable, to try and look like they've got some, more insights than their rivals or fellow content creators. But they're just saying that to try and be trendy and cool, and that's all gone. That's all gone now. No one's going to be saying that shit for the next 15 years unless we happen to win 3 CLs in that time, which we won't. So this is like Pluto no longer being classified as a planet. This is, like I said, generational aura loss. So you'll have to live with that. Irfan, your son is going to be fucked for the next couple of years dealing with all the banter from all of his friends who are wearing Desiree Doué shirts. But, maybe you can find a new school for him.
I will say, so, you guys know my son was with me at the Barcelona second leg. So I was watching the match with him. I refused to watch it with anybody else, and I was like, I'm going to watch it with him. And, he was obviously disappointed. And then when the match ended, throughout the match, he was wearing the yellow kit that the players were wearing. And then we had to go somewhere. So when the match ended, I told him to go and change. I'm like, don't go wear that. We're not wearing this out today, right now. Not that anyone really even knows what it would be in America, but still, I was like, go change. So he was like disappointed, and he like left. And then he comes back and he's still wearing an Inter kit, but the black and blue one. And I'm like, all right, well, this is some sort of solace. It was a little bit heartwarming to see the naivety and ignorance of youth, as a burgeoning fan, still sticking with the team. And that gave me a little bit of solace. But yeah, so the kids are all right. And our future is still there. We'll be all right.
All I have to say is be a better parent. Make your youngest child a Barcelona fan.
Yeah, no, that's just reckless
No,
endangerment.
Jesus fucking Christ.
You should have forced him to change.
Real Madrid. I'll make him a Real Madrid fan.
Yeah, exactly. If you want him to fit in and not be bullied at his private school, he needs to be a Real Madrid fan.
That's right. If I have children, I'm going to make sure I'm going to, do that social media shit where I put like a a Desiree Doué jersey on one side and a fucking Yamal jersey on the other, and see which one the idiot crawls to.
Yeah.
I'll post it on social media.
And then tag PSG and Barcelona and have them kind of pick it up or whatever. Yeah, exactly. Just pimp out your kid.
That's engagement. I can't wait for the next generation of kids to start doing, Doué celebration Fortnite dances, downloadable content, paid content, and that shit's going to be all over TikTok now. So we've got that to look forward to. So Inter, who previously saved football against Barcelona, has now ruined football. So thanks, Inter. Mikko, will you do the honors?
Well, hold on. Before Mikko bids farewell, I just want to say this is our 100th episode. I do want to thank all our listeners. I know we joke about how few people listen to this podcast, but we actually have a respectable contingent of you who watch every episode, comment, give us feedback, and we appreciate you sharing this journey with us. It's been a fun couple seasons. We're going to keep going here, and we appreciate you sticking with us and sticking with this club. So, Mikko, do the honor.
Yeah, I guess I'm gonna pick Forza Inter, Forza Inzaghi.
Bold choice, given the situation. All right.
Yes.
Sterling, thanks as always for joining.
Appreciate you guys. See you next time.
All right, catch you all later.